Are all voices supposed to sound the same? Is someone with a higher range better than someone with a lower range? How do you know one is a soprano or a mezzo-soprano? Let's find out. Hello everybody, my name is Moses Toto from Tenor and you are welcome to another episode of Classical Experience. In this episode, we'll be looking at the various classical voice types we have out there and how to know what you are. Stay tuned. Learn something new. There's a saying that all fingers are not equal, and it's very true. In the classical world, all voices don't sound the same. Some have different characteristics than some, and in this episode, we'll be looking at the different ways in which we can classify the human voice into categories. We'll be looking at some 3 basic methods of classifying the human voice. First of all, we'll be looking at the vocal range, and the vocal range is how high or low the singer can go within the voice, simply. The second one we'll be looking at is the tessitura. What the tessitura simply means is the particular segment in the human range or the singer's range in which he or she is very comfortable. Okay, so a singer might be able to sing from a C4 to maybe an F6 or whatever, but the singer will not be comfortable in all this range. Where the singer can stay for a very long time and be comfortable for a very long time is what we call the tessitura. That's another way of classifying the human voice easily. The third one we'll be looking at is the vocal weight. As its name suggests, how heavy the voice is or how light the voice will be. So we use all these methods in classifying the human voice. Disclaimer, all the categories we are going to do now is the general idea of the human categorization. So today we'll be looking at 7 major categories of the human classification. We'll be looking at the soprano, the mezzo-soprano, the contralto, the countertenor, the tenor, the baritone, and finally the bass. Starting from the soprano range starts from the C4 on the piano to the 6/6 on the piano. Basically, we use 2 octaves to classify a human voice, but that doesn't mean the singer can only do that 2 octaves. You can go higher or lower, but as I said, the tessitura also determines the category that you will be in. It plays a very major role. So the soprano starts from the coloratura soprano, which is the highest of all the human voice. They have the lightest voice of all, and they can go very high to the stratosphere, and they are very flexible in singing coloratura and other things. The second soprano we'll be looking at is the lyric soprano. The lyric soprano also has a lighter voice relatively, but it's a little heavier than the coloratura soprano, and it has a more fuller sound than the coloratura soprano. The next soprano we'll be looking at is the spinto soprano. The spinto soprano is a heavy soprano, but not as heavy as the last one we'll be looking at. It lies between the lyric soprano and the heaviest of all the sopranos. So we can see that as the category comes down, it increases in weight. As I said in the beginning, weight also classifies as a method. The final one we'll be looking at in the soprano category is the dramatic soprano. As the name suggests, they have the biggest voice of all, and they are very dark and just big. So the next category we'll be looking at is the mezzo soprano. So the mezzo soprano is like an extension from the dramatic soprano. They are quite heavier than dramatic soprano, but their tessitura lies in the very lower parts of the soprano range. So their range starts from the A3 on the piano to the A5 on the piano. So we have the lyric mezzo soprano. And we also have the dramatic mezzo soprano. The last female voice we'll be looking at is the contralto. So the contralto has the lowest tessitura in the female register. They have a lower voice, darker voice, and also they can't quite go very high. So they are just down there, you know. So now we'll be looking at the male voices. Before we move to the male voices, there were a group of people in the olden days called the castrato. These were young boys who were castrated at a very young age to maintain their purity in the voice, because children have a more lighter voice like, the soprano. So these boys were castrated without their knowledge, and they keep their voice to their old age, and they still sound like probably how a young child sounds probably at 9 years old or 10 years. So these boys weren't able to give birth in their older age, and that was a big sacrifice on their part. People are doing research and other things to know how they sounded, but nobody is being castrated now to find out. Would you like to be a castrato? I don't think so. So moving to the male voices, we'll be looking at the countertenor. So the countertenor are a group of males who sing in the female register using the falsetto technique. So it could be a soprano countertenor or an alto countertenor, basically. So the range for those voice types are used for the countertenors. So the next category we'll be looking at is the tenor. So the tenor range lies between C3 on the piano to C5 on the piano. The first subcategory of the tenor voices is the leggero tenor, which I am. So the leggero tenor is the highest of the tenor voices, and it is the most flexible of the tenor voices. Just like the coloratura soprano, they can go very high and it's very flexible, basically. Moving down, we'll be looking at the lyric soprano. So the lyric soprano is more fuller than the leggero soprano, and they have more just robust voice than the leggero soprano. Than the leggero tenor. So our father, Luciano Pavarotti, was a lyric tenor. Did you know that?
Schiavo son de vezzi tuoi, con un detto sole tu puoi le mie pe.
Remember, always hydrate. The next one we'll be looking at is the spinto tenor. So the spinto tenor is quite heavier than the lyric tenor.
Veniva una carezza viva, un bacio, gridai vinto d'amor.
The last one we'll be looking at is the dramatic tenor. So that's the heaviest of all the tenors, and their voices can just push you out of the theater. Yeah.
Mit zarter Waffen bezwingte die Welt, Wind und Sturm wichen der starken Vier, wohl musste den Tapfern streichen die strenge Tür aufweichen, die trotzig und starr uns trennte von ihm.
Now let's look at the baritone. So the baritone, basically an extension down the dramatic tenor. So their tessitura is quite lower, and also they have much darker voices than the tenor counterparts. So there is the lyric baritone. We have the dramatic baritone. So the lower it comes, the darker the voice becomes, basically. The last voice we'll be talking about is the bass. So the bass is the darkest voice you can ever think in the classical music genre. So we have the lyric bass profondo. And finally, the dramatic bass profondo. Alright, so wrapping up, all voices are not the same as I indicated in the beginning. Being a coloratura soprano doesn't mean you are better than a mezzo soprano because you have a higher range. No. Everybody and the role they are playing in the classical world. So if everybody has a high range and higher flexibility, which people will play the bad guys and also the villains in the story. So you see, dark voices are also very important in this world. So yes, don't classify a higher person better than a lower person. No, it's not right. I hope you enjoyed this video and tell me in the comment section below what voice type you think you are. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, Tenor, and like my Facebook page and also follow my Facebook page. See you in the next episode. Bye-bye.